On Thursday the 12th of September 1907, a rail worker called Bertram Shaw was returning from his night shift on Midlands Railways to his common-law wife, Phyllis, who lived in a flat in Camden Town, North London. That morning, Bert's mother, Mrs. Shaw, had come to visit Phyllis at 29 St. Paul's Road. She had knocked and couldn't raise her. The landlady, Mrs. Stocks, allowed her to sit in the passage to wait for Bert to come home. When he arrived, he had to borrow a key from his landlady. As he opened the door, he was greeted not with a scene of domestic harmony, but the corpse of his true love on the bed. The three of them discovered Phyllis's blood-stained body. She was lying naked on the bed, and her throat was cut so savagely that the head was only attached to the rest of the body by a few muscles. Phyllis had been killed by having her throat cut from left to right. On eventual examination of her stomach contents and the time of discovery of her body, death was said to have occurred between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. on the morning of the 12th. Aside from some trifling items that were missing, the motive could not have been robbery, and other explanations were required. The room had been ransacked, and Phyllis's postcard collection had been scattered on the floor. Someone was not interested in anything of monetary value, but wished to dispose of evidence. Someone who had also cleaned their hands of blood in the wash basin. This is a shocking Camden Town postcard murder. Phyllis was not her real name, as she was born Emily Elizabeth Dimmock on the 20th of October 1884 in the Hertfordshire village of Camden, which is near to Bishop Stortford. Her father William ran a pub called the Red Lion. By 1905, at the age of 21, she was lodging in a house at 1 Bidborough Street off Euston Road and close to King's Cross, St Pancras and Euston stations. The house was owned by John Crabtree. He was arrested on and off during the next 2 years on charges of running a brothel. By 1906, Emily was living with a common-law husband, a man named Bert Shaw, who was 19. When Phyllis and Bert first lived together, they rented rooms in Great College Street. They moved, and in 1907, Bert and Phyllis were living as Mr. and Mrs. Shaw in St. Paul's Road. By day she was a dutiful housewife. Once Bert had left for work, she returned to her previous calling, apparently missing the entertainment provided by the many pubs in Euston Road, particularly the Rising Sun. A week earlier, Phyllis had met a man by the name of Robert Wood in the Eagle pub in Royal College Street. Wood pulled a postcard out of his pocket, which he had brought back from a holiday in Bruges, and wrote on it, "Phyllis, darling, if it pleases you to meet me at 8:15 at the..." and here he drew an artist's impression of a rising sun, "yours to a cinder." He signed it Alice, so as not to arouse Bert's suspicions. This postcard was to be central to the prosecution's case. It was not posted until the early hours of Monday the 9th of September. Bert was still working his night shift on the trains. At first, the police investigation went nowhere, and it was assumed that the death would remain another murder mystery. But the Criminal Investigation Department, under Inspector Neal, started to make further inquiries, and it started to reveal some results. While Bert had been on nights, Phyllis was seen with various men in local pubs, such as the Eagles or the Rising Sun. A ship's cook called Robert Roberts confirmed to the police that he had stayed at 29 St. Paul's Road for 3 nights. He confirmed that she had been seen with a man whom he described as shabby genteel at the Eagle the previous Friday, and the night before the murder at the Rising Sun. Much to his relief, he had an alibi on the night in question. The last person to have been seen with her was Robert Wood, as they left the Eagle pub on the evening of the 11th of September. Wood was seen there by several of Phyllis's friends, and also Joseph Lambert, a bookseller from Charing Cross Road. The latter had not seen Wood since the previous February, something on which Lambert had remarked. So who was Robert Wood? He was a 28-year-old and came from a respectable Scottish family and was living in London. He was employed by the Sound and Blasting Manufacturing Company on Gray's Inn Road to paint delicate designs on glass. But he had one weakness. He liked consorting with women of easy virtue. It was not until he was clearing out Emily's possessions that Bert Shaw found a postcard from Robert Wood. It had been posted on the Monday morning. Believing this to be a vital piece of evidence, the police had it reproduced in many daily newspapers, and then in the News of the World, on Sunday, September the 30th. The postcard was seen by, amongst others, Ruby Young, a past girlfriend of Wood's. Realizing how dangerous this could be, he met her the next day and asked her to agree that they had been regular partners and always saw each other on Mondays and Wednesdays. At first Ruby agreed, but could not keep a secret. She told a friend who had a friend who worked in Fleet Street. Ruby was contacted by the police and identified Robert Wood as he walked down Gray's Inn Road, close to his home in Frederick Street. The police had one key clue. In a drawer in Phyllis's room was the postcard from Alice. More importantly, the police discovered an album on the floor in which certain postcards were missing, as well as a torn and charred letter with the same handwriting as the mysterious Alice. Wood claimed he had met Phyllis at the Rising Sun on Friday before the murder. A boy came in trying to sell postcards. Robert told Phyllis that he had others to give her, which he believed to be of a superior quality, which he had bought in Bruges. He gave her a card, and she asked him to write the time and date of the next meeting, but sign it as Alice. This was to placate Bert, who may have wondered why some strange man was meeting his partner. On Sunday, the couple met by accident, and Phyllis mentioned she had not received the card. Robert posted it that evening, and she got it the next morning. Ruby went to Wood's brother Robert, and stated that his brother must account for the whereabouts in the week of the murder. An inquest into the death of Phyllis was underway, and a post-restaurant letter signed by Robert, Charles and his wife Agnes was sent to the police stating that Robert would cooperate with the police immediately if he was indicted. But Ruby was thoroughly alarmed at this stage. She went to another friend who advised her that she may be the next victim. On the 4th of October 1907, Ruby met with Wood in Gray's Inn Road. Unfortunately for him, Inspector Neal was waiting, and he was arrested. Robert tried to use the connected alibi that he had agreed with Ruby, but it was no use. The police had already extracted the truth from Ruby. 2 witnesses were found. A bookseller called Lambert testified he saw Phyllis and Wood in the Eagle as late as 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday night. But the real problem was a labourer looking for work, who was out on Thursday the 12th and spotted a man in the vicinity with broad shoulders, wearing a dark overcoat and a bowler hat, walking with a peculiar gait, not dissimilar to Wood's. Wood was supported by his employers and other patrons, and a well-known criminal solicitor called Arthur Newton was appointed to represent him. Newton was a fashionable lawyer in legal circles, as well as the general public. Newton tried to throw the case out at the police court, except his client could not produce proof of his innocence in the early hours of the morning, and had concocted a so-called alibi with a woman of debatable reputation. The trial was to commence at the Old Bailey on the 12th of December. Counsel for the prosecution was to be Sir Charles Matthews. He was a formidable advocate who was involved in famous trials, such as Oscar Wilde's libel case. Counsel for the defence was Edward Marshall Hall, who has been described as the great defender, although he was not infallible. He never became a judge, much to his disappointment, and is largely remembered for his oratorical skills. The case was sensational, and the gallery of the court was packed, and huge crowds gathered outside the Old Bailey. The key witness was the ship's cook, Robert Roberts, who had slept with Phyllis 3 days before the murder. He explained that she had shown him the Rising Sun postcard and fragments of the letter in the grate. He had claimed to the police that he had seen Phyllis in the company of a man who he identified as Wood at the Eagle and the Rising Sun on 2 separate occasions. Marshall Hall, in his cross-examination, focused on whether Roberts knew Phyllis, which he did, and did he know Wood's, which he agreed was true, knowing that he knew that Wood was a friend of Phyllis. If Wood was found not guilty, the next man in line was Robert Roberts. It is no wonder that Marshall Hall wanted to get the man to speak up. The ship's cook was sweating by the end of the cross-examination. The next key witness was the labourer, who claimed to have seen Wood around the time of the murder. During the initial hearing at the police court, Arthur Newton attacked the man's character to no avail. Instead, Marshall Hall ignored this approach and concentrated on the day in question. The labourer said that on the day of the murder he saw a burly man with an overcoat come out of the house and noted the weather was a drizzly, foggy morning. He couldn't see his face, but was struck by the unusual way he walked. Marshall Hall pointed out it was one of the hottest days of the year and that the lamps in the street had been extinguished minutes before he saw the accused. The workman admitted he read about the scene of the crime from the newspapers. Also, he never mentioned the man's peculiar walk to the police in his first statement. A witness called Moss, who worked with Wood, described the accused as a gentle character. The judge broke in with the following question: "Have you any idea the life you have now heard he was leading, an immoral life?" When the witness replied that he had no idea, the judge posed this question: "You had no idea he was leading the life we have heard he was?" Marshall Hall objected to this line of questioning and was chastised by the judge for arguing with him, as the judge was talking to the witness, and warned Marshall Hall not to argue with him. At the end of this session, Marshall Hall tried to rescue the situation by addressing both the judge and the jury with these words: "In the interests of justice, there is not a particle of evidence that the prisoner ever had any improper intercourse with Phyllis Dimmock." The judge was openly hostile to the defence, and the following exchange between the bench and the advocate gives a flavour of this distaste. When Marshall Hall objected to the evidence of a so-called witness, the barmaid at the Eagle could not identify either Wood or his companion on the night in question. The judge replied, "You have said that before. I have not forgotten it." A key witness was Ruby Young. The crowd outside the Old Bailey was openly hostile to her, and she needed police protection to get to the court. There were 50 constables outside to quell any possible riot. Marshall Hall was very gentle with Ruby, and he pointed out that Wood wanted her to state that they had met hours before the actual murder, and his father and stepbrother swore that the accused arrived in the house around midnight. The final day before summing up, a series of ladies of the night appeared before the court, and as their evidence was contradictory, their witness statements were quickly dismissed by Marshal Hall. The last witness was an extraordinary character called John Crabtree, who claimed to be of no fixed abode. This was technically correct, as he had recently been imprisoned for running a disorderly house. He claimed that he had seen Phyllis and the accused on a number of occasions, and he recalled in detail a quarrel between them over a silver cigarette case. Marshal Hall then proceeded to discredit and query the credibility of the witness due to his previous criminal record and continuing offences. But this did not answer the crucial question. What happened on the early morning of the Thursday? And only Robert Wood could answer that. This posed a terrible problem for the defence. All murder trials in which the accused had entered the witness box had ended in disaster for Marshal Hall, as it was a one-way trip to the gallows. He was even warned about not allowing Wood anywhere near the witness box by his solicitor Arthur Newton. As it turned out, Wood made a terrible witness, both to the defence and the prosecution. After the barristers made their final speeches, all eyes were on the judge, and his summing up is worth quoting. It must be assumed that, because no motive has been shown on the part of the prisoner, therefore he must be not guilty. There is no doubt the dead woman was murdered by a man who was leading a double life, by a man nobody would believe to be a murderer. Gentlemen, the whole evidence seems to prove that the prisoner was leading a double life. There has been no explanation of the burnt letter, which is very strong indeed against the prisoner, and would justify the jury in believing the ship's cook's story. I think there is evidence that the prisoner knew the murdered woman. The evidence as to this showed that he was lying at the beginning, just as he lied at the end. Wood's own story is extraordinary. There was a poor woman done to death, with whom he had contact within an hour or two of the murder. He says he is innocent, yet he keeps everything from the police and his own brother. Inside the court there were cries of "grossly unfair," which could be heard by the judge. Outside, the crowd numbered hundreds and overflowed into Ludgate Circus. They were wildly pro-Wood, and Ruby Young had to swap her fur coat for a shawl when she left the court and disappear into the crowd. It must have been horrifying for her to hear the chants of the crowd, with the refrain, "Ruby, Ruby, won't you come out tonight?" No wonder there were mounted policemen in reserve to quell any disorder. But this diatribe against Wood ended in the most remarkable way. The judge ended his speech with the following words: "Although it is my duty to further the ends of justice, so that criminals are brought to court and are properly convicted, however, strong circumstances may be against him. In my judgment, strong as the suspicion is, I do not think the prosecution have brought the case against him clearly enough. It took the jury only 15 minutes to find Robert Wood not guilty, to great acclaim from the assembled onlookers." Bert Shaw went into obscurity and died in the 1960s. Robert Wood actually went on tour to discuss the case and later became a children's illustrator. He also died in the 60s. Marshal Hall received his knighthood, but never graced the bench as a judge, much to his annoyance. But he was always right to fear letting the accused into the witness box. In a later case, he was overruled by the client, who condemned himself, and went to the gallows. As a curious postscript, the Edwardian artist Walter Sickert, who lived in Mornington Crescent, made a number of paintings based on the murder. He has been linked by some as being responsible for the Jack the Ripper murders in 1881, although he was living in Paris during the time of these events. He adopted the phrase, "the Camden Town murders," for a series of etchings, paintings and drawings in 1908, in each of which the subjects are a clothed man and a nude woman. The paintings in particular have specific titles, such as "What Shall We Do to Pay the Rent?"